Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Hope everyone's enjoying the nice weather and a little bit more freedom. Murray Kinsella here. We are missing Gavin Casey today, unfortunately, but I'm joined, as always, by Bernard Jackman. How are you, Birch?
Good, thanks, Murray.
Have you got out for a pint and outdoor dinner yet?
No, but it's I'm planning and scheming, so probably next week. I just need to get a bit of a crew and find a booking, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, they're few and far between the bookings now, in fairness, but it is nice seeing people around with a smile on their face. It's summertime again. Some of the rugby, so last weekend was proper summer rugby, and I suppose that's what you get when there's not a huge amount on the line in terms of competition. Unfortunately, this weekend, that's going to be the case as well, Birch. Just briefly, Benetton are into the Rainbow Cup final. We got a question on your Twitter, actually. Someone asked who would win a match between Benetton and the Crusaders. That was from Ronan Cunningham. What do you reckon?
I think he was being sarcastic, but I think the Crusaders are favourites for that. And look at the Benetton on their day. You know, the big problem for Benetton was their season, the regular season form. They just deteriorated so much from what they were doing 2 years ago and 3 seasons ago. I think they can play. But obviously have been fortuitous in terms of the structure of this Rainbow Cup, and obviously playing Zebra twice, and now getting a walkover effectively. It's really blown up in the face of the organisers. You know, it was always going to be difficult to try and get a fair fixture list, but certainly the Irish teams having to play each other, were hampered from that point of view. So, but look, it is something different. Maybe it can be. We're always looking for ways to boost Italian rugby and to have them more competitive. So I'm sure it'll be a big deal in Italian rugby circles, and potentially that would be the benefit from it. That they will get stronger, get a bit more confidence, and next year be a bit of a force again. Because this year not winning a game in the regular season, if I'm correct, that's a poor reflection of the quality they have.
Yeah, absolutely. A tricky one for the broadcasters, probably not what they imagined, but as you say, let's hope it's a stepping stone for Italian rugby, a home final, probably missing a few Springboks, whichever team comes over to play that final in Italy as well. And they've had a couple of good results. They hammered Glasgow, they beat Connacht, obviously, very recently, and fair play to them, I suppose, for turning it around. The likes of Munster will have regrets. Obviously, losing at home to Connacht is the big one there. It felt like an opportunity for them, but it does feel like a bit of a fitting end to what has been a weird little Rainbow Cup kind of segue at the end of the season. But listen, we want to talk about the provinces. We've got loads of questions to get into, but basically we're going to review their seasons, Birch, and have a look back, and also at where they stand now going into a summer after the longest, weirdest season ever. I want to start with Leinster, who obviously they won the Pro 14 again, but a Champions Cup semi-final exit. How do you think they'll reflect on this campaign?
I think they'll be disappointed, to be honest. I think they, particularly how they've put the last 2 months. So since La Rochelle, before La Rochelle, obviously, just they rested players for that La Rochelle game against Munster, and by losing that, they were always going to be on the back foot for this competition. And obviously not getting a bonus point at home to Ulster, meant it was always going to be difficult. They'd be very frustrated with how they played against Glasgow, I think, at the weekend, and they just looked tired and fatigued. And I'd say that there's probably no team. I think they probably looked after themselves the best in COVID. They got going quickly. They trained incredibly hard. Not that others didn't, but I think they really pushed on in COVID within the restrictions. Came out of the blocks flying. Apart from that, obviously Saracens game where they got caught their pants down around the scrum, but won 2 trophies this year. But yeah, I think there'll be a little bit of regret in terms of they haven't really found 2 or 3 new names. We knew about Ryan Baird last year. We knew about Hugh Keenan last year. Now they've kicked on again, but we knew about Scott Penny last year. But probably, and this is maybe the worry for Leinster when you look at it's obviously only friendly games that Richie Murphy's picked under 20 sides for so far, but it's not. Leinster aren't dominating the selection at Irish under 20s level like they maybe were previous years. Their A team have lost a few times to Ulster. I've watched some of those games on stream. Don't look to be as strong maybe as previous teams. So, and obviously then they're losing Scott Fardy. Obviously they replaced Michael Bent with Alatoa. I think Alatoa will do well to have the same impact as Michael Bent. And obviously it's in a position where they have Andrew Porter and Tyke Furlong. So, okay, they've got a third choice tight head who's good quality, but is that going to help them beat the Toulouses or the Racings or the Saracens or the La Rochelles, etc.? Saracens won't be there next year, but those type of teams, the Exeters, and Fardy moving on, and there's no outside replacement coming in to add to it. So yeah, I think Leinster will be looking forward for the break, and I think they need to refine how they play. I think that'll be something they look at this summer. You heard Scott Fardy this week, I think it was on the 42, talk about they feel teams can slow the pace of the game down, and that was always one of the things they tried to impose on the opposition and play really high tempo, really high ball and play time, and back their fitness. If the conditions and how the game is being refereed aren't allowing them use that, well, they're going to have to find a different way of doing things. So I'm excited to see if they can find another edge and come back in September, better. But you would still worry personnel-wise. Have they that quality to go win in Europe? And I still think they're very reliant on Johnny, and obviously he's playing on, which is great. But I think Keane Healy, and Johnny. Eventually the time will catch up on them, and unless they move Andrew Porter across, have they someone who can have the same impact as Keane Healy over the next 5 or 6 years? And likewise, they've got obviously Ross and Harry, who are very promising, but they still have to step up and show there's influence Sexton. So yeah, I think it's one of those ones where they'll be happy to get Dragons out of the way Friday night, get their holiday. Hope their lines come back fit, but also evolve their game plan, which I think, could do with a bit of a sprucing up. And they'll know that better than anybody.
Yeah, no better man than Stuart Lancaster to go away and study how the game is going and where it's going next and do a bit of critical thinking. That's what he loves to do and thrives on. You've kind of touched on quite a few of my notes here, and I want to bring you back to a few of those different topics you've touched on. We got a question from David Hewson on Twitter. He said, do Leinster have to sign a heavy-hitting lock to get the 5th star? They're knocking on the door, but of late we hit a wall at semi-final or final. Like, just to run through, as you say there, Scott Fardy is leaving. Dev Toner is actually going to stick around after all. You have James Ryan there, Ross Maloney, Ryan Baird, as you mentioned, Jack Dunn, who's been injured more recently, but he is a big unit. And then you have Charlie Ryan and Brian Deeney. They're going into year 3 of the academy, so probably will feature a little bit more. How do you think they adjust there, Birch? Because as things stand, we haven't heard there's a big heavy duty lock coming in.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think there is. I think they obviously would have a space in terms of non-Irish qualified, with Gibson Park and James Lowe being Irish qualified now, so they would have a space. I'd say it's probably finance, to be honest, that's stopping them. And again, I don't know, is there the same flexibility, to bring in private funding? Is that private funding available at the moment to go and get that, different type of profile? Like, I think we really need to see Ryan Baird become a starter, and a starter as a lock, and let him and James Ryan, build up a relationship. Like, they're not both of them are probably. They hit bigger than they are, really. I know Ryan Baird's they're both big men, but they both can win collisions. I just feel that it's a big task for James Ryan on his own in the second row when you play those big teams in Europe to beat the enforcer. So I would like to see Ryan Baird be given his wings as such, and just let him play. Start every week with James Ryan for those bigger games that the internationals are available in, and let him continue to develop. He's shown he has that athleticism. Let's be honest. I mean, everyone, if you ask or listen to the people talking about what Leinster need to sign, bar Will Skelton's name, not many other people have alternatives. Do you know what I mean? So that profile is not really plentiful. It's not like they're in every Premiership club, every club in France. So it is a difficult one. I mean, they're not growing on trees, and so unless you found somebody out there, RG Snyman is that type of profile, to be honest. Again, but he's one of a handful in the world, and most of them aren't off contract. So I can totally understand why Leinster haven't found that player. Do I disagree that they could do with him? No, I don't. I think they could, but because I think that's not likely to happen this year, I would love to see Ryan Baird. And I'm not saying he's been held back by any manner of means. I mean, Leinster have done a good job in developing him. He's had plenty of game time. But I certainly would like to see him, start every week in the second row with James Ryan and let them develop a Donnacha O'Callaghan, Paul O'Connell type relationship where they have the potential to be starters for Leinster and Ireland. And obviously there's other locks out there who would have something to say about that. But just from a Leinster point of view, I think that's your age profile with the two of them is phenomenal. Your athleticism with both of them is phenomenal. And it's a good starting point. I don't think many teams in Europe would have two locks as athletic as those starting.
Yeah, you're kind of looking at James Ryan being that tight head lock, which he was, I suppose, at the start. He was always scrummaging there. And a lot of the stuff he's good at doing around the pitch are those kind of duties. He obviously struggles to keep the weight on himself as things stand. So it'll be a tough ask to ask for even more. And when he's away in Ireland, I do think Jack Dunn has a guy who has potential to be that kind of player for them. He's a guy who's put on a lot of mass. You see him, I know he's been injured, but you see him at games and he's a big unit with lots of potential. Obviously a smart head on his shoulders as well. So as always, Leinster are going to try and adjust from within. The other one I wanted to pick up on again is Johnny Sexton. Like, much discussed. He is the captain, he's the leader, but he's obviously getting on in years. Like, how do you see them, like if we're looking at solutions here, how do you see them managing that now? Ross Burns obviously started some big games. Harry Burns there, seen as a future prospect. You have Frawley, Tim Corkery, Hawkshaw, all capable of playing 10. What's the planning like for that next season?
Oh, look, I think next season the plan will be around Leinster trying to win Europe. I mean, I think that's where they judge themselves on, and it's very important, I think, for Irish rugby that we have provinces who can win European trophies. And at the moment, Leinster look the best equipped to do that. And I think Johnny will still be number one for Leinster next year, and possibly still number one for Ireland, and potentially then sign a new contract and go to the World Cup. I mean, I don't think that's completely out of the question yet. But signing the 1 year, it kind of gives them a shorter term focus, and it obviously took the pressure off the IRFU to make a hard decision as well. So I can still see Johnny be number one, but I do think that the way Leo manages it and Stuart manages it, that the others will get opportunities to continue to have shots at replacing them. But to be honest, I just think, and again, it's hard. People find it hard to understand. I think is that when Johnny plays, the influence he has on everybody is far greater than every time he touches the ball. And let's not forget, he didn't play in La Rochelle, and even though Leinster got dominated up front, I still, and maybe I'm naive in this, I think the game would have been a lot more of a contest if Johnny had played, because Leinster didn't really show great tactical flexibility. I don't think they implemented the plan they would have had going into it, and that's not down to Ross on his own or whatever. But I think Johnny has that ability to make everybody else better, and I still see him being number one. To be honest, all next season, I think if Leinster are going to win a European Cup, he's going to have a big role to play. To be honest, I think if he was injured for next year's European Cup, I can't see Leinster win it. To be honest.
Yeah, his influence is still it's extraordinary, really. And the loose head one, I just wanted to bring you back to as well. Cian Healy's successor. Like, I think he'd probably admit himself it wasn't his greatest season. He's still performing at a high level, but maybe slowed down a little bit, and that can just be a temporary thing. Like, all sorts of things going on in people's lives. It's been a strange, tricky season for everyone, and maybe he'll bounce back really strongly next season. Ed Byrne and Dooley have been kind of vying there, and now Michael Milne's being promoted up from the academy. You have Marcus Hannon going into the academy. Do you see a long-term successor there, or do you feel still that Porter is the one who should be switched over?
Yeah, I think Dooley and Ed Byrne have a huge amount to offer. But I think if you're looking for world-class loose head, it's Porter. And look, it's very hard because he's obviously the long-term. Well, he's obviously good enough on his own right as a tight head to go on a Lions tour. So, but I think if you want to get your best 15 on the field, I think a front row of Port. Sorry, obviously I'm talking about post Healy, but a front row of Porter, Kelleher, and Furlong is Leinster's most dominant pack physically, and that could make up maybe for not having the RG Slime and Will Skelton type second row. If you can add another big collision winner to your starting team, and Healy like could bounce back. He's well capable. He's done it 4 times in his career. So if Keane gets back to that level, well then I can totally understand why you would have Porter coming on at tight head. But I just think, and it's no disrespect to the lad, to Ed and Dooley, etc. But those world class props, they're very hard to find. And Leinster found two on the tight head side, and Keane at his best is world class and has been. And if he bounces back to that, then they're fine. But if he struggles with injury and form, I think Leinster with Porter on the loose head side are a better team.
Fascinating to see what happens. There's a little bit more movement. Keane Keller's off to Ealing Trailfinders. He actually had a good season, I thought. But Leinster will hope to have Adam Byrne back, Andrew Smith, Comerford, Max O'Reilly potentially stepping up a little bit more. And then they're switching scrum halves with Munster. Rowan Osborne is going down there and Nick McCarthy's coming back up. There have been a number of younger guys or fringe guys who stepped up. I think Jamie Osborne from Naas is a really exciting one. Looks physically well capable of playing at the top level. Dan Sheehan, obviously. And then the back row, you had Scott Penny being really consistent, as well as Josh Murphy. I thought he was ultra physical this season and really stepped up. We got a question from Paul Kenny, and it's kind of an evergreen question. He says, Leinster back rows, what's the odds on any of them moving this summer? Because that depth chart, Birch, is still pretty deep.
Yeah, it is very strong. And we saw someone like Will Hickey, who was an unbelievably good schoolboy, come into the sub-academy in Leinster, and it was pretty clear they weren't going to take any back rows. We've seen someone like Keane Prendergast, who was in that Leinster sub-academy, but couldn't get into the academy, went to Connacht. And I think he's been really impressive in the last tour. He's been impressive all year, but particularly last 3 or 4 games. I think, he's someone actually for a guy who doesn't look very big, is very effective in getting over the gain line. So, there's a depth underneath that again, which is becoming very difficult to break through. But it's really weird actually. It's the first probably year I haven't heard a big kind of strategic move or drive to move Leinster players out. Maybe that's because of COVID or whatever, but there's been no talk. Don't forget Deegan's got to come back from injury, and he's he's a really exciting player. We know now what Doris is top end back row. Penny's taken every chance he's had. Leinster, that's obviously Leinster's strongest position. Just on like the one that I think you mentioned there, Jamie Osborne. If I speak to anybody involved in Leinster pathways, and speak to the players and coaches in the senior squad, he's the one that I think has that extra bit, that could go from Naas to playing for Ireland, and those guys, they only come along. Well, Leinster produce one a year pretty much for a long time, but in general, they're they do stick out like sore thumbs when they're in and around their own age grade, and he's definitely someone that is being earmarked to go up and make a difference quickly. Whereas probably there's other players, and it's a slow and gradual thing. So they do their 3 years in the academy, and then they come out and then they start to get game time off the bench, and by the time they're 24, 25, they can be really good players, but and really effective and can have great careers. But I think the Ryan Baird, the Ronan Kelleher's, the Dan Sheehans, to be honest, you hear about them a bit earlier, and they unless injury prevents it, they come true. So I think Osborne's the one to look out for. I would say, and this is probably a bit controversial, but I think there's a huge focus on Leinster needing that big lock. I think they could do with another very good nine, to be honest. And that's not a slight on Luke or Gibson Park, but I think that, and Nick McCarthy's obviously coming back, but I think you're going to lose one of those to international duties. We've seen Gibson Park this year getting in ahead of Luke. I don't think that it would be a bad thing for Leinster to have another top end nine who could play. Like, let's be honest. Okay, I'm thinking ahead here. Like, if Leinster go and evolve their game, it's okay. You can say they're not going to play that high ball and play time, or they can't control that as much as they potentially could at the end. I still think they're going to have to play with tempo. I still think they're going to have to be unbelievably sharp around the breakdown in terms of moving the ball into space, about putting people into holes, because and again, just use La Rochelle as an example or whatever. They can give the ball to someone like Bougerie or Skelton or Olivion or whatever, behind the gain line, and their power gets them back to the gain line and get through contact. I think Leinster, even with Porter and Tyke Furlong, etc., they're still going to be a lot better if they have a nine, maybe a different profile to Luke and Nick. More of a Gibson Park, but probably a few other strings to his bow, who could change the way they play. And again, I don't see it happening because obviously restrictions, but I do think that's the area that doesn't really get a huge amount of focus on. And I don't think Leinster are as strong in that area as maybe you would think a team of internationals are. And that's not that's being hypercritical, but I think it would give them better strength and depth for the knockout stages of Europe to have another top end nine.
I agree. I think it's probably the one area where Leinster would love to produce a world-class player of their own, top level. And there doesn't seem to be that in the pipeline. Interestingly, I sometimes wonder if Joey Carberry should have stayed at 9. I think he could have been really good there. A bit tall now maybe, but it's a fascinating one. I totally agree with you on Jamie Osborne. Like, he looks physically like he's ready to go already at that level. A product of the Leinster youths, and a guy who came on and immediately on his debut smashed someone and just got on the ball and looked really composed. By all accounts, he's a very studious, diligent guy. His younger brother actually is supposed to be a very good player as well. But exciting to see that talent coming through. And otherwise, a pretty cohesive squad, obviously, moving forward. And we know that cohesion can be really important. They'll be back challenging on all fronts again next season, as we know. Munster, Birch, again, like, what's your sense of their season? They didn't collect the silverware they were hoping to collect, out in a weird Champions Cup, obviously, at the round of 16 and losing to Leinster a couple of times again. How do you sum up their campaign?
Yeah, I think it's been disappointing, to be honest. I know this competition has been ridiculed a little bit, and justifiably so for certain reasons. But I did think it was really important for Munster to go and at least get to a final and potentially win it. They responded really well to having been beaten by Leinster quite a few times, particularly in the Pro 14 final. The last one, a Pro 12 final. Yeah, I don't know what it's called anymore. But in the final that they played in the RDS, they didn't fire a shot, and obviously a few weeks later, then they came to the RDS and were very physical, got in amongst Leinster, upset them. Now, let's be honest, Leinster had an eye on the week after, but they still did their job. They won, and then they took what looked like control of their own destiny. With obviously Connacht, Cardiff, and Ulster coming to Thomond Park, and Ulster set a second string, so that was ideal. And then losing to Connacht was a real blow to them, because I thought against Ulster they continued to be really physical. They looked to be dominant at the breakdown, and then against Connacht got amongst them, and they had no real plan B, and they got rattled. And then the Blues performance, so Cardiff performance was so as well. So there wasn't a massive backlash, and obviously, it looked like they had a chance to go to Zebra and still qualify if Treviso lost in Swansea, but that's been taken away from them now. So I think that they, RG Snyman will add to them. I don't think Jenkins will add to them, but he's not a game changer, and they're losing CJ. Craig Casey's come through, so they've got 2 good 9s now. Joey's back, which is great, and obviously he's been managed pretty well in terms of his game time, and he's looked really good. They've got good depth, but like I think the Zebo's coming in as well, which is good. But I said it I think last week, when you take Cronin, CJ, Billy Holland, Reece Marshall, Sweetman, JJ out of that squad, and you replace them with 2 players, thought if you're going to do that, you needed to really find out more about the others, the youngsters. And I think they've been unbelievably conservative at times. So take, for example, the game against Connacht, I think 4 of the pack that played against Connacht aren't going to be there next year. So, and that's fine. They wanted to beat Connacht. But when you don't beat Connacht then, and you don't make a final and win silverware, it's double jeopardy. You've lost the opportunity to move on. Those other players like Knox and Salanoa haven't been given the game time that I think they should have been given because we know what John Ryan and Stephen Archer can do. The other 2 are still rough diamonds. Now Knox, in fairness to him, is probably a little bit further along, but he's playing rugby union a lot longer. But maybe it's Salanoa who's the one who can make the difference. In terms of being that real power athlete that everybody's so excited about. So, and I know injuries like Tom Ahern and stuff and Hodnett have maybe, been the reason why they haven't played at the back end of the season. But I think at the early stage of the season, and over the last couple of seasons, they've been very conservative. And now, because of cutbacks, they've had to chop their squad a little bit. And I don't have an issue with that. I think, I think there was time to have a bit of a cut. But they haven't really brought in the numbers they need to bring in. And again, I think in terms of hooker and loosehead, I think they're a little bit alike now. And if we spoke about Dooley and Byrne for Leinster as backups to Cian Healy, they're a little bit. They are a long way further along in their development in terms of minutes and games and years than Wycherley, etc. and Liam O'Connor. And I think Liam O'Connor and Wycherley have looked really good. I mean, I think there's loads of potential there, but Munster are a team that we have to be aiming for European Cups. And if I'm conscious that maybe Ed Byrne and Dooley, aren't of the level you need in a semi-final or final to make an impact off the bench or whatever, well then it'll be hard for Wycherley and Liam O'Connor to do that.
They're asking big questions to them. Yeah,
in time, absolutely, and I think they could. But I just wonder have they really got the squad next year to go to another level? I'm not sure.
James French being promoted from the academy loosehead as well, and Lockman. So I mean, they have the 5 looseheads, but you're right. I suppose there's an element of the unknown with it. Josh Wycherley being the one probably with the highest potential. We saw him against Clermont, a powerful guy, and that is a big thing. Like we just spoke about Leinster and Lock, but the tight 5 power is something that's come up repeatedly with Munster, and that's why it's probably so disappointing with Knox and Salanoa that they didn't see more game time. And I know Salanoa had a few niggles, as you mentioned. They used 53 players across the course of the season, Munster, but the minutes probably weren't spread out as ideally as you would have liked. They got a lot of development out of the likes of Casey, as you mentioned, huge amount of game time. Ben Healy obviously at out half doing the same, and they managed to keep him amidst that interest from Scotland. Gavin Coombs, like he went to the next level, didn't he? And I thought Fineen Wycherley was kind of similar, a little bit quieter, or it's less obvious the impact he's making, but it's improved across the course of the game. Like with Coombs and with Stander leaving, how do you feel they're set, Birch, to accommodate and adjust for that? Like Snyman comes back, Jenkins comes in. Do they have enough there to adapt?
They have a very good team on paper, and I agree with you about Coombs and Wycherley. Hodnett, when we've seen him, Casey when he's had his chance. I mean, the probably frustrating thing for me is that, in fairness, nearly all the youngsters who got game time actually impressed, but they didn't seem to get the reward of getting a chance to back it up, reasonably quickly or get a little run of games. And I mean, the best examples, and sorry to keep going back to Leinster, but like Ruddock, Josh Murphy, when they play regularly, you see, how good they can be, and in fairness, I think Munster, they playing 53 players is a huge amount, but it's that balance and consistency of getting a run of games together, which I think those young players need. And then if you have to pull them out for 5 weeks to give them a conditioning block or skill development block, I can understand that. It's just where it seems to be a little bit haphazard, and they're being thrown in and out. So yeah, look, they have a good pack. Tommy O'Donnell, they'll miss. Not obviously this year he hasn't played a huge amount, but he's a guy who's been a great servant, and influential in behind the scenes as well. I think, look, on paper, Munster have a very good team. Probably question marks around I have question marks around their defence. I don't think they're hard to break down. And the most recent example is Cardiff. Cardiff got around them and had him on the back foot so easily, and that's something they're going to have to rectify. And then, how would you classify Munster's attack? I mean, have they got attacking identity that's clear, and that you can see evolving? I don't think so. And I think one of the questions you had was, Roundtree. Has Roundtree had a good influence? He has. Their set piece. Think back to Claremont. Scrum is good. It just can be a little bit ill-disciplined sometimes, and give away some soft penalties in the wrong areas of the field, which they need to rectify. But the pack do look to be better. Their breakdown for me is definitely better, even though against Connacht they're going to a bit of trouble. But in general, the last 3 or 4 months, the breakdowns look good. I just don't really know if their attack is really firing yet, at the level it needs to be. And maybe that's all down to Joey. Joey having a pre-season and Joey being fit, the early doors will get them moving. But that's probably the question mark for me. Well, I have a question mark around the defence and attack. So yeah, it's not great.
That is that's funny, because literally on my notes here I have identity question mark, and that was the big one I was going to bring you to. The question we actually got that you mentioned there is from John O'Gorman. He says, bar the scrum line out improvement under Graham Roundtree, no idea or direction from the rest of the coaching ticket, he feels. Can we discuss that? And the identity thing, like, that can be such a philosophical kind of bullshitty word, Bert. You obviously have to adapt to opposition and conditions, and you've got to change things week to week. But it feels for me right now like we see Munster the odd time, or actually quite regularly through the season, they'll have this kind of free-flowing game where they offload more, where they show their skill level, but then they'll get into the heat of a high-pressure contest where obviously you're not going to offload as much or use those skills as often. You've got to have an element of pragmatism there, but they don't look comfortable in that moment where they need to push that pass or make that offload. Like, how does that reflect what they're doing on the training ground? To me, it almost looks like 1 week they're working on an offload focus and a more ambitious, intentful attack, and then they'll reel it in and focus on box kicking, even though someone like Craig Casey is not a kicking 9. I know he's got to improve his individual skills, but how dedicated do you have to be on the training ground to actually fully implement a shift in style?
Yeah, I think you have to be fully into it, and I think that's possibly the challenge. And let's talk about pre-Larkham. So, pre-Larkham, I think we saw Johan's philosophy, which is obviously a huge amount of contestables and really strong exits, and kick focus. And I think now, obviously, Larkham's been there a year, and there's been a sense of evolving, etc. But I still think it's the DNA of Johan's philosophy is on the team, and I think when they get under pressure, they go back to that. And I think, I was in Tobin Park a couple of weeks ago for the Connacht game where they're chasing the game, and they went back to kicking contestables in the Connacht half, and in fairness, like, it's a strategy and it certainly can work. But when Connacht caught those bombs and relieved pressure themselves, Munster didn't really have a plan B, and that sometimes, it's very difficult when you have two philosophies mismatched together. And I'm not blaming anybody for this, but it's normal for a head coach who's coaching and not a DOR to have strong feelings around how he believes the game should be played, and sometimes, like how you kick and how often you kick is going to affect your attack. Likewise, how you defend is going to affect your attack, and how you like what percentage you maul off the top, what trick plays you play is going to affect how you attack. So it's all interlinked, and I still think Munster are still trying to find that Goldilocks porridge, the perfect mix, and I think it's a little bit conflicted at the moment, and again, they're not together that long. Obviously, COVID was difficult, and I think this preseason for them will be huge in terms of refining their game and hopefully having that identity. Like, I would still say their identity is focused more around exits and kicking game than it is around ball in hand, despite the fact that we've seen some offloads and things like that. I think you have to judge them when they come under a bit of pressure, what they go to, and I still think there's work to be done there. That's not a criticism. That's just where they're at.
Yeah, you mentioned JJ Hanron's exiting to Claremont. Exciting move for him, but it means the 3 academy out-halves step up: Healy, Crowley, Flannery, all onto senior contracts. Briefly, where do you see that tussle for the place behind Joey going?
Yeah, look, I think it's very exciting and it's very unfortunate for the 3 of them that they have 3 players with basically all the same age profile, and all very talented. And this is really hard on Ben Heaney because I think he's done phenomenally well, and is very impressive every time we see him. But and it's based on old form, and it's based on reputation. It's basically based on his under-20 stuff. I still think Crowley has something I'd like to see more of, to be honest. Flannery's a very good operator as well. But yeah, for me, Healy or Flannery may well be the best of them. But until I see Crowley play 3 or 4 games at 10 at this level, I'm going to stick to my assumption that he's the best, if that's fair. And it's based on, he's been injured, he's been with the sevens, etc. He played fullback, I think, the last 2 times off the bench. He's come on a fullback. I would love to see him as a 10, getting a run of games, and that may be when Joey's with Ireland next November, and just see how good he is. And if Healy or Flannery are better than him, well then they've got 3 very good 10s.
Yeah, absolutely. A nice headache to have, and really exciting for the province as well to have 3 homegrown guys coming through with talent and ability to play in a couple of different positions, as you mentioned. Last one from Munster. What is Zeebs going to add to the party? How big an impact do you think he's going to have, Birch?
I think he'll have huge impact. I think in the dressing room, on the training field, that relax, that sense of fun, that confidence in himself, that self-belief that maybe they're lacking as well. I mean, let's be honest, if you've fallen at the penultimate or the final hurdle, as often as this team have over the last 4 or 5 years, even with Razzie as well, like it wasn't just Johan, it was with Razzie as well, it can get into your head, and having someone like him who genuinely believes he has the Midas touch and can actually have big moments in games, can score tries, can make things happen. I do think Zebo is a really good signing for them, and his, like, speaking to Prendy, when the big games come, he gets better, and that's what Munster need. They need people who can step up and do something extraordinary, at a key moment. And I still think he has loads of that in him, and I think behind the scenes he could be, really good in that environment and just making sure it's enjoyable and fun, and they have confidence in what they do. And also him being away and seeing how things have done in Racing and being part of winning teams in Racing can come back and just validate some of the stuff they're doing as being, this is right. Let's stick with it here, and let's back the coaches here, and also question and challenge if it's something that he's picked up from Finn Russell or from Siobhansi or whatever, and just add to it. And I think he's at that stage of his career now where he was never shy, but I think he could be someone who's who's in that game management group and can actually add to their playbook and their attacking shape in particular.
Yeah, the fans are going to love it down in Munster and Thomond Park when they're back in, and he's throwing up his Z celebration. And so that's exciting. The Ulster fans, meanwhile, Birch, they'd love to win a trophy. They'd love to see the project under Dan McFarlane topped off with a bit of silverware. Obviously a Pro 14 final, this kind of long extended season. The Challenge Cup semi-final was really disappointing in the end, giving up that winning position and going down to Leicester. They'll probably reflect on this again with quite a few regrets.
Yeah, I think 5 competitions this year, or maybe 6. It's a big blow. And look, at losing to Leicester, it's no, it shouldn't be a black mark. But realistically, I think Ulster, given that they've turned things around under Dan, given them being the second best team for a long period to Leinster in the Pro 14, were competitive in the European Cup. I think they really should have went down to that competition, at least got to a final. And it's going to be difficult for Dan. Dan's done a really good job in terms of obviously, bringing the squad back from what were very dark days, finding and developing some young talent. Obviously, that Kieran Campbell had found in the academy, and giving them their time and space and letting them develop. But I just wonder, I wonder now losing Marcel. I think it's a massive punt on Nakawara, and if he obviously could be great and he's going to be exciting to watch, but he's going to have to really refine his passion and drive for playing again, and that's a big challenge. It's not. That's a really strange one in that we know he has massive ability. We know on his day he can be, one of the best players in the world, but he's dropped off significantly, and it's going to be the arm around the shoulder. It's going to be making him feel happy, making him feel part of the group. That's going to get him back to the next level. Like, he's not someone that's sitting down and doing one-on-ones on a video is going to make him significantly better. Doing tackle drills or breakdown work is going to make him significantly better. He has everything. He has his own unique way of doing a lot of it, and that's what makes him special. But it's getting him, I suppose, driven again, hungry, and to go from there. So it's I think it's a disappointing season. Challenge Cup, massive mistake, and probably not knocking Leinster out of the Pro 14 that they lost to Munster as well. Just they could have managed that game last 5 or 6 games a bit better with no semi-finals. They had a chance to knock Leinster out before, by getting into the final in their own right. They missed out on that. So probably when the pressure's been on them, they haven't really stood up, and that's probably the question mark Dan is going to have going into this off season is the whole mental fragility, and I'm sure he's working on that.
Because Andy Wilson was on to us on Twitter. He said he thinks Ulster have gone backwards this year without some top class signings. I can see them being the 4th Irish province next year. Pessimistic enough view there. And it has been a weird season. Like, we should say that with all the stuff we're talking about. It's been crazy. So, I mean, we can't make sweeping definitive judgments based on this one campaign. But it will be interesting to see how they bounce back. That was a really interesting point you make there about the mental side of it in those bigger contests. Like, they've been massive about playing with tempo, with high skill level. Dan Soper, obviously, who's going from skills coach to attack coach next season, has made an impact in that regard. And when they play at that tempo against teams who they probably expect to beat, they look really good. In those bigger contests, though, Birch, they're like often losing kind of consecutive moments where they compound an error with an error. And obviously we know Dan McFarlane has real strength in that psychological side of the game. How do you, like, from being in good Leinster sides, etc., how do you actually develop that aspect of it to actually start winning those big moments in the massive games?
Yeah, there's some things you can do, like in the classroom. There's some things you can do in groups. There's some things you can do individually, with sports psychologists, etc. But probably it's a combination of those things plus trying to create those difficult situations, those stressful situations at training, and that's definitely something that Leinster do a lot. And the reason they can do it a lot is because they have, number 20 to number 40 are all, high level players who can really stretch the starting team, and then the coach can, create situations, but taking putting a man in the bin, making him put more players in the breakdown, etc. So he can stress the first choice 15 and try and get him comfortable, making better decisions under pressure, or finishing opportunities when they get them, and limiting to those opportunities. So that's a challenge for Dan and Munster and Connacht, in that they don't have that depth to make training, as match-like as possible at certain times. And Dan I think he'd be looking to develop the leadership group. He'd be looking to develop their ability to problem solve. And we saw it with Connacht a lot in really obvious examples, like key moments in games where, Andy Friend would have been very disappointed with their shot selection. That hasn't been as blatant with Ulster, but that's something that you need to work on, and also, educate your decision makers on opportunities that aren't just in the 79th minutes or the 80th minutes, but and it's one shot. It's those moments during the game where they probably need to be better, and it's an ongoing process, and unfortunately, it takes time. And like going back to Leinster, I mean, like Cheika tried from 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. There was always a doubt about our mentality. There was always issues around us, getting up for the big games, or performing on the big days. And it took 4 years to probably overcome that. And to be honest, we won the Magnus League in 2008, and that little bit of a trophy kind of gave us reassurance we're on the right track as well. And that's why I think, and it's done now, so you need to move on. But that Challenge Cup and that Rainbow Cup for Munster and Ulster could have been huge for them in terms of just that little bit of difference in terms of belief. We've been in the final before, or we've closed it out. I think that's something that there was an opportunity there for both those teams this end season, and they let it slip. And obviously you live with that, and you got to still try and overcome it. But I do think more so than the actual trophy itself, it's the impact it could have made next year when they go into big games.
Absolutely. Be fascinating to see what they've learned and how they put that into action. Listen, there's loads of talent coming through in Ulster. It's been a bit of a conveyor belt in the backline in particular in recent years. James Hume, I thought, was outstanding in nailing down that 13 shirt with Luke Marshall out injured. Stuart Moore showed plenty of glimpses at 12 as well of his playmaking ability, a kind of rounded midfield game. You had David McCann in the back row, who there's lots more to come from as he steps up onto a senior deal. And Ethan McElroy was another one. I thought he was really impressive, particularly on the left wing. One of the guys I wanted to ask you about was Cormac Izuchukwu, who kind of came out of nowhere really into Irish rugby. He's obviously done his ACL, but we saw glimpses there, Birch. And I mean, we've talked a lot about power forwards in this podcast. Glimpses there of a guy who could be that late developer and make a big impact, particularly if you're losing one of your main ball carriers in Coetzee.
Yeah, I was up there for one of the games he played, and again, it's kind of like that Jamie Osborne. You just see a player who looks comfortable and has time, and a little bit different than Jamie from him in that, he just seems to have that extra bit of power in contact, both with and without the ball. So he's somebody really unfortunate, obviously, to pick up that injury, long-term injury, but. I'd say Dan and Roddy Grant and now Soper obviously are really excited about his potential, and like it's like in the NFL or the NBA, if you can find that athlete who's a cut above of the rest, they'll go further. It's become, and even I read Scott Fardy talking about it now. And he's talking about it from a size point of view, but Size obviously can help you win collisions, but there's other guys who aren't as big who have that extra bit of power, and they can win you games. They can make things happen really easily, and sometimes they have crap technique. It doesn't matter. They just they can physically dominate their opponent, and he looks like he has that. And that's going to be his point of difference. And the coaches will teach him the rest of the stuff. But I think he's a really exciting guy, and they have found again, kind of like Munster, talent that looked like and have shown every time they get pro minutes that they do seem to have that ability to step up, which is that's all it's about. Like, I don't think you need to have. I said earlier on, Leinster A don't look to be of the same level they were previously, or don't have that many guys in the under 20s. That's not the be all and end all. It's the 2 or 3 players who can come through and become 100 cappers for. They're the ones that you are going to make or break your academy success. And I think Ulster and Munster do seem to have. Leinster still do. We spoke about them earlier. They seem to have those now, which is brilliant.
Interesting to follow Izuchukwu, and fingers crossed his recovery goes well. They've given him a contract anyway. And for a guy who wasn't even jumping in lineouts relatively recently, had never done it, he's doing pretty well in the second row. Interesting to see what happens there. The other people who are leaving the province are Matt Faddis, but I mean, back three, they're stocked with Stockdale, Addison, who can play midfield, Little, Balakoon, Gilroy, Aaron Sexton, who is lightning quick. And hopefully we see him get more minutes under his belt. He's been with the Sevens recently. Albie Matheson gone at 9 Birch. Started really strongly, even displaced Cooney in the final, but probably had a declining impact. And now they look for Shanahan and young Nathan Doak to step up. Yeah,
disappointed probably at how the back end of the season kind of finished for Manchester. And first, Cooney, he really found his form and he nailed down being number one. And it didn't really have the impact. Like, look at Madigan, obviously was back up to Billy Burns, but came off the bench twice against Edinburgh and kicked winning points, etc. Matcham has just struggled to have those moments. Part of that game against Edinburgh in the semi-final, where he came on and did have a big influence. So big pressure. Doak is obviously someone, like, we know a lot about Shanahan and he's obviously back up, but is Doak is probably the one. He's the one that they're all talking about. He's the one that there's huge hope for, and I'm excited to see him come through. Obviously, he's been a match squad already, but he's the one that I've been for 3 or 4 years, and I'm looking forward to seeing him come through.
Generally, the chatter is pretty reliable, and you can rely on it in terms of potential. Finally, I just want to ask you about the 2 prop slots. We've spoken a lot about front fives, and this will be an interesting one because Tom O'Toole is seen as a player of high potential by Ireland as well. Eric O'Sullivan has been pushing, but Marty Moore has been consistent this season, and Jack McGrath will hopefully come back from his hip surgery new and improved. That's been really plaguing him for a long time. Can you see the younger guys usurping the experienced heads there?
Yeah, I think they will in time. I think they will. Marty and Jack have had, really good careers already, and are still probably Jack with a good hip is probably still ahead of Eric from that set piece point of view. But the 2 lads definitely have the potential. They're both really mobile. They both carry the ball well, and they're under, like, Dan is a very good scrum coach as well, so they're getting good tutelage there. And I think by the end of next season, I could see both of those, being first choice for big games.
Really fascinating to see what happens in Ulster next season. Connacht, I got the sense, Birch, last weekend, obviously season ended. There was almost a relief to have this weird campaign done and look forward to hopefully better times next season. Where do they stand? They were targeting playoffs, and obviously the way it worked out with the format of the season, that wasn't realistic in the Pro 14, just with a final. They went out in pretty underwhelming fashion in the Challenge Cup to Leicester with some really weak defensive efforts in that game. Did you see development or standing still this season from Connacht?
No, I saw development. I think they're always going to struggle for that consistency just because of their squad depth to back it up. But I think for them, they showed in Ravenhill, in the RDS, and in Thomond Park, they can get up for those big games, and to win 3 times away from home in Irish Interprovincials is a big step up. I think Papali'i is going to be key for them. I know, there's huge talk about his discipline and etc. But I do think, we have to understand that he's come from a very mixed pathway between league, union, and predominantly league. So, and also he wasn't in great shape physically when he came, and they've improved there. So, I think this was really a prep year for him, and we saw enough, obviously, and Connacht saw enough to recontract him, and he has that spark that I think can get Connacht into the game, and that's always been a challenge for them when they come up against teams who are, really physical, and they can't play that kind of loose style, and they get suffocated a little bit. That they didn't have a plan B, and I think I wouldn't say it's a plan B to go to the power game, but Papali'i can change the defensive line, and get that little dent that others then can get on the front foot, and so I think he's a key man for them. And yeah, they've like the guys they brought in from Munster have done well. He's Andy Friend has been very successful in terms of probably getting not really high profile Australian players to come in and have an impact. So Ben O'Donnell's obviously hasn't played as much as John Porch, but I think he's exciting. I think you've seen enough in him to go, yeah, he could be really dangerous for them. Fitzgerald and Carty, Blade has had a phenomenal season. Like, he's clearly number one now. But you'd imagine with a good pre-season, Marmion will come back, and he's a huge amount to offer. You've got Delahunt and Heffernan. I think props. I'd love to see the rumor that James Cronin has been made an offer by them. I think they need help there, and if they could get him, on board, and I think they're taking a young prop from Leinster as well. I think that they're not a million miles away. New coach, I think, obviously new coaching setup. I know Dewald Senegal very well. I think he'll give them a different voice than Jimmy, obviously, but have a different way of looking at things. Obviously his background is in the top 14. Their Maldi was their big Achilles heel this year, and I know that's something Dewald's going to try and address. And if he can address that and make that less porous, they're not a million miles away. I don't know. Like, realistically, the only thing that's holding them back, I think, is that maybe depth of squad when they go into a run of games and have a few suspensions or injuries or lose Bundy to Ireland. They can be sometimes a little bit stretched there, but that's a resource thing more so than a coaching or effort side of it.
Who's the young Leinster prop? You slipped that one in there.
I told you earlier on WhatsApp. What's it? Greg?
Oh, Greg McGrath.
Greg McGrath. Yeah, Greg McGrath. Wexford Wanderers. The rumour is he's going down there. And a great opportunity for him. He's a guy, a very strong guy, great attitude. Obviously, loads of growth in him, but I still think they need that international class. And I call, like, Buckley for me is as good as internationals. In terms of the influence.
Yep.
Week in, week out. If they had a James Cronin, along with those two hookers I mentioned, Finlay at tight head. They're not a million miles away. They don't have the same depth as Leinster or Toulouse or whatever, but I think they're a little bit light without James Cronin.
Like, on that depth, we got a question from Brian Duffy, who also says he loves the pod. Thanks very much, Brian. He said Connacht have been consistently inconsistent this season. How can they address that? What's your thoughts, Birch?
Yeah, I think Andy Friend. I think the main reason is the depth. But I think it's been tough for them. Like, it's been tough for everybody, but for them, even you have to take into account, travel is a little bit harder to get from Galway to away games. Everything's a little bit harder, and also younger players are generally a little bit more immature mentally. And also, let's be honest, a lot of the players they take in maybe have a little bit of baggage about having been let go or not succeeded in their own province, and it takes a little bit of time to get them up to believing in themselves and being consistent as well. So and that's the challenge. I mean, there's players who are in Connacht who maybe in terms of skill level or athleticism were as good as the players who got chosen ahead of them in their other province, but maybe there was just a little bit of mental fragility, and we have to take into account that they probably have more of those guys who maybe suffer a little bit from inconsistency or doubts or whatever than the other provinces. So it's going to take Andy Friend and his coaches a little bit longer to improve on that. So I think we have to be forgiving to them for that reason, plus the youth side of it, and also then the squad depth in terms of spend. They don't spend as much on number 45 to 55 as everyone else because of less money.
A couple of new signings, interesting new signings with Leva Fafita coming in to replace Quinn Rue, a heavy-duty lock, and Fafita is a Tongan international, played at the World Cup in 2019. He's 31, so he's got a bit of experience, and from what we know, he can play a bit as well, and coming over from Grenoble, obviously with Senecal, there's a good relationship there. The other one is Shane Bolton, the young South African guy who's soon to turn 21, and turns out he has an Irish passport, Bernard. An interesting enough signing, kind of out of the left field, a guy who, he's not with one of those four major franchises at the moment, but there seems to be a bit of excitement in Connacht certainly about his potential. What do you make of that signing?
Yeah, look at it. It was an interesting one given our long debate about Sean O'Brien last week. I don't think the position that they needed to strengthen, and I do agree with your argument that they already, even without Sean O'Brien, they were well stocked in that position. I think, I've done my research, my contacts in South Africa. Bolton, he's a bit of a wild card, to be honest. I think if he hadn't got an Irish passport, there's no chance any of the provinces would pick up on him. His CV isn't strong in terms of he didn't go to a big traditional school. He's made his impact in the Varsity Cup, and he has done well there. And there's been glimpses, and those little bits of glimpses have given the Cheetahs. The Cheetahs have been caught by that, and they're looking at him, or were looking at him in terms of maybe somebody they contracted. But it's a punt, and it's a hard one to, I would say, our pathway here would compare quite favourably to the Varsity Cup, in South Africa, even though there's lots of razzmatazz, and it's, there's 8,000 people at some of the games, and it's live, and it's become a real Bucks rugby there. It's been really well marketed, and there is a excitement about it. But the games I've watched, I would say if you've played Irish Under-20s here in a Six Nations campaign or gone to a Junior World Cup, that's probably a level above it. So that's the challenge. But look, he's obviously he's Irish qualified. He has shown potential. It's just not clear, how high his level can get to. But I wonder just the timing of it. I mean, I believe it was done a few months ago, so maybe it was done before Sean O'Brien kind of had that game time that made us more excited about him than people were, before he'd really proven at Pro 14 level.
Timing is everything. Bolton did play fullback in school, I think, and he can play on the wing as well. So interesting to see where he pans out. Connacht do have actually a centre in the Ireland Under-20 squad who's just named. Shane Jennings is in there, as is Cathal Ford, the out half. And we got a question on this topic, Birch, because Conor Dean is one of the kind of outgoing players. So Conor Fitzgerald and Carty are the two senior out halves. And then you've got kind of Ford as the next one. Colin Mulvihill was on asking, any idea if there's a third choice out half signing, or will Mac Hansen, who's coming in from the Brumbies, he's Irish qualified, generally plays in the back three but cannot cover out half, and also Tom Daly, will they be used as backup? He thinks Ford still seems a bit young. What do you make of that, Birch?
I don't think there'll be a signing. I think they'll come from within, and they'll use that signing from Australia to cover if they need to. Probably Jack and McCarthy and Fitzgerald probably won't be away a lot. Doesn't look like that. So I think they're okay there. And again, look at ideal scenario. Yeah, they go out and sign another 10 who's proven, but Connacht aren't in that market at the moment because of budget constraints. So yeah, you got to pick your battles. And I think if there was extra funding and they were using that to try and get James Cronin, that's a better spend than a third 10 who's going to be behind Fitzgerald and Carty.
Joe Glenn was on asking about their NIQ allocation. Actually, he said, completely unscientifically and having done no actual research, they appear to have a lot of NIQ players and adding more next season. Well, Dominic Robertson-McCoy is Irish qualified. Jared Butler's Irish qualified now, isn't he? So they have Papa Lee, O'Donnell, Porch. Mac Hansen's coming in Irish qualified, as is Shane Bolton, as we mentioned. So Fafita is kind of the fourth there. And there's a bit of understanding. The other part of his question, though, Birch, was, is the stubbornly high proportion of players from outside Connacht becoming a cause for concern? He says very often the vast majority of their matchday 23 is from outside the province. Do you think that's a concern?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, let's be honest, it's not going to change until the domestic rugby scene improves, in the West. And I know, Eric Elwood and, Nigel Carlin before him, and all the development officers are putting huge work into, I suppose, grow the game at schools and club level down there. But again, it's a performance sport, and Connacht need to be competitive and win games, in Europe or in the Pro 14. So they have to pick the best talent. And unfortunately, at the moment, it seems the best talent's coming from, picking up players from other provinces, whether at a young enough age to go into the Connacht Academy or the likes of Sammy Ireland, etc., who are already seasoned pros. And that's a real long-term play. And, you're competing with, obviously, GA hurling in a lot of those provinces where there's high profile and well organised competition. So that's something that, it's going to take time. But all the stuff they do at the pro end of it, and the more competitive they are, the stadium development, training facility development, all that stuff in the community, that will all add to it. It's just not a quick fix. It's not going to be overnight.
Well, best luck to all four provinces. Long-term and short-term work to do next season. Before we go, Bert, a little bit of breaking news. I've just had a couple of messages on WhatsApp about it. Dan Kelly's been named in the England squad ahead of their summer test, the Ireland Under-20 International. Yeah. We kind of saw this coming, but it's disappointing nonetheless to lose a guy who was in the system and is now obviously thriving in Leicester Tigers.
That's the risk if you don't get them home after Under-20s and they show potential. I believe Leinster were interested in him coming back, but I think there was a push towards sevens. I understand, and he wasn't keen to play sevens, and that's completely his choice. But the fact now, it looks like he's been capped for England. That's disappointing, really. But that's the risk with the NIQ. The English clubs will want them to play for England because they stay EQP, and they're always have a strong allegiance to that. Even if they play Irish Under-20s, they I signed Ross Moriarty back to the Dragons. He played English Under-20s. It's not just because you play for that country on the 20s level, they don't see it as being a commitment. We know Billy Burns as well. So it's not an exact science. And I think if you don't get them home, if you don't get them back to Ireland, their home is England. If you don't get them back to Ireland quickly, that's the risk you run. And the Dan Kelly one is an unfortunate one. But as I said, I don't agree with the resources we're spending over there. But it would be great to have Dan Kelly as someone who is helping our provinces win on a weekly basis.
Fine player. He's made a decision and best of luck to him. He's definitely got potential to go all the way. As we mentioned, there are a couple of games just before the provinces finish up. Munster away to Zebra tomorrow and Leinster at home to the Dragons. It'd be great to see some fans back at that, adding to the summer vibes. But Birch, thanks a million for sticking around. We're a bit longer than usual, but wanted to get into all four of the provinces, so appreciate it. Cheers to everyone for listening in and for all the questions. We'll be back on Monday with Owen Toolan on the 42 Rugby Weekly Extra. If you want to sign up for that and plenty more with the 42 membership, you can go over to members.the42.ie. For everyone else, we're back next Thursday with this pod. So in the meantime, have a brilliant week. Cheers.